So I work for a pregnancy and parenting website called EverydayFamily, and we have over 4 million members that I'd love to share some information with them about mosquitoes and ticks. This time of year is really bad. I'm down here in Florida, and the mosquitoes are insane. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about, first of all, the risks associated with these little monsters, but also how we can prevent them and protect ourselves. So first off, why is it that these illnesses that are coming from mosquitoes and ticks seem to be on the rise, and what should we be looking for here?
Okay, so you're spot on. The CDC reported that the number of insect-related infections has more than tripled in the last dozen years or so. And there are a number of reasons for that. Largely it has to do with the expansion of the range of a lot of these insects or infected insects. And so, for instance, with ticks and Lyme disease, where we've seen a tremendous expansion, it has a lot to do with there's more mice, there's more deer. That's what the ticks love. And so the ticks are thriving. The winters are not as harsh, so they're not dying out. The mice aren't dying out as much. So we see increased expansion and number of infected ticks and therefore propagation of Lyme. Other things, and part of the reason why there's increased infections is some of them are new. West Nile virus did not used to exist in the United States, and then it arrived, and within 3 years it was everywhere in the country, as it was transmitted and transported by birds all over the country. And so anytime you get a new infection, you have a lot of people just sitting there, naive and waiting to get infected. They have no immunity.
Yes, absolutely. So speaking of that, how can we not be naive? How can we, as parents especially, protect our children from these diseases?
Well, the main thing is trying to balance, having a good time in good weather. People like to be out and about when it's warm and sunny, against the risks of that exposure. And so, insect repellent does work, and I recommend it. And so that should be used in exposed areas of the body and according to manufacturers' recommendations. There are a number of them that work well against mosquitoes and ticks, and they should be used. Clothing, clothing, it all depends. If I know I'm going to be camping or hiking in a tick-infested area, I might reconsider the shorts and flip-flops and go to boots and long pants so that it makes it harder for the ticks to attach themselves to me. So that's important.
Absolutely.
And then ultimately, another important thing, especially if you're in an area where there are tick-borne infections, is get in the habit of doing a tick check. Because very often, if the tick is removed within several hours of latching on, that is before it can actually transmit infection. Like for Lyme disease, it takes 24 to 48 hours of feeding before that infection can be transmitted from the tick to the person. So if you do the tick check and remove the tick, you're pretty much likely to be fine.
That's very good, yes.
Then
absolutely.
Of course,
so you mentioned, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, then there's a whole series of things that can be done in and around the house. Look for cracks and make sure they're sealed, make sure your screens are in good condition. You guys in Florida go to the point of screening in your entire pools. So all of these things do make a difference. It probably is part of the reason why Zika did not explode in Florida while it did in other places in the Caribbean. It's because the truth is we use much more screens and air conditioning, and that is all helpful to us.
Absolutely. You mentioned bug spray. Do you, there's DEET, there's Pickardin, there's, eucalyptus, all these things. Do you have a preference on one that you find, maybe works better than others, or is it kind of a
they're all quite
one size
effective.
fit all?
No, they're all quite effective, and even they can vary in concentration. You can get DEET in different concentrations. Obviously, the higher concentrations will be a little bit more effective, but you sometimes need to be careful on how you use the higher concentrations. I would refer you to the manufacturer's instructions on their use and age-appropriate use of the repellents, but they do work.
Absolutely. And then the other thing that, we talked a lot about ticks and Lyme disease, which it's great that it sounds like we've got 24 to 48 hours of leeway time there to try and prevent that. And Lyme disease is a very serious issue. But with mosquitoes, and it's just a single bite that can happen in an instant and transfer that, what are some symptoms or signs as a parent like we should be looking out for these things like West Nile and Zika that can be transmitted via mosquito?
Yeah, of course, it all depends upon the infection, so there'll be differences. With regard to West Nile, the really good news is the vast majority of people who get infected actually have no symptoms at all. 80% of people who get infected have no idea that they were infected. You only discover it by doing a blood test that shows that they had previously been infected. The 20% who do develop symptoms usually get relatively mild symptoms. Body aches, maybe a little bit of a rash, headache, low-grade fever, and they realize something is wrong. Most often they don't actually think that it is West Nile. It's only in the extreme forms of West Nile, which is less than 1% of all infections, where we'll sometimes see paralysis and even coma, potentially death. Those are the most worrisome. Luckily, they're quite rare. They tend to occur, the worst forms, in older people rather than children. And so those are thoughts. Zika, same story. 80% of infections are asymptomatic. The other 20% generally have these nonspecific symptoms. The real problem with Zika, of course, is pregnancy.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's one that we always advise our pregnant women to make sure they're using that bug spray and they're staying indoors during this time of year and really just being vigilant about it, because you do have to be careful, especially if you're asymptomatic and you don't know that you had it. So that is our advice as well. So do you have any last minute tips or advice for our members just in general about the season and these little creatures that we're trying to avoid?
Yeah, I'd like to refer you to pestworld.org. It's a great resource, has a lot of information and links about the topics we've just talked about, as well as more. And, try to go out and have a good time, but take precautions.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time today, and we will be sharing this with our members, and hopefully we can prevent, these unwanted diseases from happening to our families for sure.
Great.
Have a great one.
Thank you. You too.